Hey guys, my name is Ryan Nerney, and I am the managing partner at the nationally recognized security clearance, military, and federal employment law firm of Tully Rinke in the Ladera Ranch, California office. Welcome to the fourth episode of the podcast for the National Security Clearance Lawyers Association. This is the very first podcast made to teach people from all industries that require a security clearance the ins and outs of the security clearance process, what adjudicative bodies look for in potential disqualifying and mitigating conditions, and also what potential and common situations mean for your security clearance. So whether you're an employee for a government contractor, a federal employee, or a member of the military, you are sure to pick up some tidbits of some useful information when you listen to the NSLA podcast. So in today's episode, we are going to continue our series where we talk about the specific adjudicative guidelines for security clearances. And we previously spoke about Guideline A. However, today we will be talking about Guidelines B and C for foreign influence and foreign preference. We're going to do two guidelines today because they're fairly related because they both have to do with foreign aspects of potential concerns. So by the end of this episode, you'll have a general understanding regarding what adjudicators typically look for regarding Guideline B and Guideline C cases and the disqualifying and mitigating conditions for each guideline. So let's get into it. Now, if you tuned in for any of our last three episodes, you learned that any adjudicator for these potential security concerns focuses their review on 13 adjudicative guidelines disclosed in the Security Executive Agent Directive 4, also known as the SEAD 4, pursuant to Executive Order 12968. This consists of guidelines A through M. And as I mentioned before, today we're going to talk about guidelines B and C. So specifically talking about Guideline B first, Guideline B typically relates to security concerns pertaining to foreign influence. Essentially, this guideline is concerned with foreign contacts and interests, including business and financial property interests as well. And if that causes any divided allegiance or creates what they call in the security clearance realm a heightened risk for potential vulnerability to pressure or coercion by any foreign interest. Some of the common disqualifying conditions are, routine contact with a foreign family member, a business or professional associate, even a friend or another person who is a citizen of or a resident of a foreign country that potentially could create that heightened risk we talked about before. Connections to a foreign person, group, or government that potentially could create a conflict of interest between the individual's ability to protect classified information or the interest that of the United States. Also, under this guideline, there's a failure to report or fully disclose when you're required to, association with a foreign person, group, government, or country. It's also, shared living quarters with a foreign individual that potentially could also be a concern. Any substantial business, financial, or property interests in a foreign country, whether you own it or even honestly, if you potentially could own it through inheritance or something like that, potentially could also be a disqualifying condition. Unauthorized association with a known agent, associate of employee, or an employee of a foreign intelligence agency. Things like that are typically what we see, for these types of guidelines and Guideline B specifically. Now, some of the mitigating conditions for Guideline B are that, the nature of the relationship with these foreign persons are such that they're unlikely to put the individual in a place of having to choose between the interests of that foreign individual or foreign country and the United States. Also, that there's actually no conflict of interest just because of the individual's loyalty or obligation to that foreign person is significantly less than what that is to the United States. This includes deep and long-standing relationships and loyalties in the United States. Also, contact or communication with foreign citizens that's casual or infrequent. Infrequent is kind of a gray area, and it's kind of a catch-all word that could mean, a few times a year. That could mean, once every other month. It just kind of depends on who the individual is. But what they look at is if that reduces the likelihood of any risk of foreign influence or exploitation. Also, another thing that they look at is that if these contacts or activities are on U.S. government business and they're approved by an agency, that obviously is also a mitigating condition. Also reporting requirements. It's mitigating if you actually complied with all agency reporting requirements regarding reporting foreign contacts or financial property. And then another mitigating condition under this guideline is, the value of the business or financial interests or the property interests are, minimal, and that they're unlikely to result in a conflict. A lot of times we like to look at this through, showing the amount of assets you have in the United States versus what you have, in a foreign country. So those are typically what we see for Guideline B and kind of the outline of what Guideline B is. Moving on to Guideline C. Guideline C concerns words or actions that would show a preference for another country over the United States. This can include obtaining a foreign passport, which is typically after obtaining U.S. citizenship, not using a U.S. passport to enter or exit the country, meaning the United States, or any other actions that not only show favoritism to another country over the U.S., but might lead to actions that potentially could harm the United States or its interest. So some of the disqualifying conditions that are typically looked at in Guideline C cases for foreign preference are, again, like I said, applying for or acquiring citizenship in another country, failure to report or disclose possession of a passport or identity card issued by another country. Like I said, failure to use a U.S. passport when entering and exiting the U.S. Specifically for that disqualifying condition, that is only when you're entering or exiting the United States. So if you, are entering another foreign country, let's say the United Kingdom, and you have a passport with the United Kingdom, it's not going to be a concern to use your United Kingdom passport to get into that country. However, if you use your United Kingdom passport to get into the United States or to exit the United States, then that would be a concern, and that potentially could show some foreign preference for that foreign country. Also, participation in foreign activities, including, assuming some type of government employment, potentially serving in the military voluntarily. Also, using your foreign citizenship to protect financial or business interests in another country that potentially could violate U.S. law, or one of the ones we don't really see very often, but is readily apparent, is that if you declare your intent to renounce your U.S. citizenship, obviously those things would show preference for a foreign country. Moving to the actual common mitigating conditions for this is that, a general catch-all is that the foreign citizenship is not in conflict with U.S. interests. Dual citizenship is based upon, your parent citizenship, or that you were born in a foreign country and then came to the United States. Expressing a willingness to renounce that foreign citizenship is also something that they potentially look at as mitigating. Anything along those lines, the exercise of entitlements or benefits of a foreign citizenship don't present a national security concern. That one's kind of, a gray area there as well. Any civil employment or military service was authorized by the United States or potentially occurred before, United States citizenship occurred. A lot of times individuals have to serve a mandatory military period in a foreign country, and then they come to the United States afterwards. That's typically not a security concern, although it can be raised as a security concern. It's usually pretty easily mitigated. So those are the common things that you see for Guideline C cases in relation to mitigation. Now, obviously there's some overlap for these types of guidelines, but there is a difference. Otherwise, there wouldn't be two guidelines. So while these guidelines are similar in some areas, there are definitely some differences between Guideline B and Guideline C. Guideline B is more of a catch-all for any type of foreign influence, like I said, whether it be foreign contacts, foreign businesses, foreign property, serving in the foreign military, something like that. Well, Guideline C focuses more on showing that preference for the foreign country, such as using a foreign passport to enter or exit the United States, voting in a foreign election, obtaining a passport or citizenship of a foreign country, typically after being granted citizenship in the United States, and even taking a position with the foreign government. So generally speaking, when looking at Guideline B and Guideline C, they can cover a vast array of security concerns that relate to close and continuing contacts with foreign nationals, whether it be family members, friends, business associations, or even acquaintances in some circumstances. A relationship with any of these individuals can elicit Guideline B concerns. I also reference like property or financial or business interests, right? That even includes sometimes inheritance or anticipated inheritance of property. If your parents or family members are citizens and residents of foreign countries, they own property there. If they pass away, you'll inherit that property. That can also raise some concerns because when the government looks at this, what they can see is that property potentially could be used against you to as leverage potentially to divulge national security secrets. So that's one of the things that they look at, and one of the things that the main aspects of Guideline B that we typically see. Under Guideline C, it's typically a concern with dual citizenship. This is not really as big of a concern as it used to be. But if you obtain citizenship of a foreign country after you've already had U.S. citizenship, that's a major concern. Obtaining a foreign passport after becoming a U.S. citizen, and something I've seen in the past, but not really recently, is service in foreign military. Sometimes, like I said, it's mandatory. Other times, it's voluntary. Typically what I see for the foreign preference is just some sort of action by the individual to show preference or infer preference of a foreign country to that of the United States. Renouncement of U.S. citizenship obviously is a major one, which we don't typically see very often. Foreign employment, even if it's prior to coming to the United States, that's something that potentially could be a concern. And then, using a foreign passport to enter or exit the United States. Those are the main things that we see for each one of those respective guidelines. Now, going into some specific scenarios, one of the things that I've seen in my practice in some specific cases is, a lot of times is family members overseas, and the frequency of contact with those family members. That risk is even heightened even more if you have a situation to where that family member either currently does or has worked for a foreign government in the past, or even if they receive a pension from a foreign country. Those are specific aspects that I typically see. I've had a case in the past where an individual has had 5 or 6 family members who have lived overseas, and he stood to inherit some property from his parents, as his mother, I believe, had just passed away. And one of the ways that we were able to mitigate that case was, showing his intent to sell that property, right? So by selling that property, you remove any heightened risk. Also, obviously, the death of a family member, that contact would obviously end, and then showing how infrequent or casual that the conversations with other family members in a foreign country were. So in that specific case, we were able to mitigate the concerns, and that individual was able to get their clearance. So that's just a real world example of potentially what these types of cases can entail. Specific countries that we typically see that have the largest concern, this kind of ebbs and flows. It kind of depends on, the political environment and things like that. But currently, obviously, Russia is a big one. China is a big one. In the past, we've seen a lot with, the Middle East, when we were over there. for Operation Enduring Freedom and things like that. So, those countries and associations with those countries were big in the past, not so much now as, Russia and China have kind of, boosted up to the forefront there. So it's important to note before closing out this podcast that many judges and, in fact, department counsels, which are also government attorneys, do make a point to indicate that the mere possession of close family ties with a person in a foreign country is not, as a matter of law, disqualifying under Guideline B. So while this is generally true, if there are security concerns in direct conflict with the interests of the United States, even if it's a single family member, adjudicators, administrative judges, adjudicating bodies, whoever, must always resolve in favor of the national security with any doubts, unless proper mitigation is provided. So there you have it. That is it for this month's NSLA podcast, closing out potential concerns and information related to Guideline B and C. Please keep a lookout for more content to assist with your current and future security clearance journeys while we continue this current series of going through the adjudicative guidelines. Thank you for listening.